This episode is brought to you by Active Digital, where we help customer-obsessed companies become destination brands.
When you think about insight into your customer base and the topic of feedback, it's a delicate balance between the feedback that you get from your customer base or even your target customer base, how that gets incorporated into your product or your service, and where you choose to sort of forge ahead in an area that maybe isn't as well known to your customer base, and how you actually need to educate the market at times, right? So,
how well do you know your customers? Today, we're going to talk about how to know them better. Do you want to decommoditize your products and services? Do you want to become a destination brand, increase your revenue, and have more control over your pricing? You're in the right place. Each week, we'll talk about how to create great customer experiences and how to orient your company to enable them. For your hosts, Devin and David, and this is the Experience Leader Podcast. Hey folks, how you doing? Welcome back to the show. David, how's it going, man?
Always a pleasure to kick off the day with you, brother. It's going. Man. It's going.
I heard that, man. I heard that. I am going. I'm going through, I guess, that season change stuff. So, folks, today, if my voice sounds a little bit weird, I'm trying to fight off a cold.
Man, you and me both. It's like that time of the year. I don't know whether to blame it on the pollen or just like stuff going around or whatever, but it's that April, May stuff, man.
Yeah, no, it took the whole family. I'm the last holdout. So, but the show must go on. Show must go on.
Indeed.
So today we're talking about customer insight, and this is the second part in a 5-part series that we're doing over the course of the next few months here, called the 5 Forces of Customer Experience. And if you haven't checked out the first installment, highly recommend that you do, because these two topics are tightly intertwined. Doesn't mean you got to stop listening now. You can definitely check this out if this piqued your interest, but definitely go back and listen to that when you have a chance. So we're gonna talk today about the force that is understanding the customer. It is a force that you can leverage to be able to supercharge your ability to surprise and delight your customers, to be able to meet their expectations and potentially exceed them, to be able to enable your team to have the information that they need to be able to serve the customer. And it's such a huge part of product development, of being able to honestly keep yourself away from being disrupted. And that's why it is so high on the list in the 5 forces for me. What do you think, David?
Yeah, man. I mean, I love this topic, particularly because, for me, I'm a bit of a data nerd, and there's a lot of, there's a lot we can get into around metrics, what you track, why certain things are more meaningful than others, et cetera. But the other thing that we'll talk about, and, for me, it's just so important, is just that idea of focus, and we talked about that, last time when we were getting into purpose around just orienting around purpose. But orientation, is kind of the step 1. But then step 2 is then how do you really start to hone in on your customer, and how do you bring focus to your organization across the board, not just in product features or maybe not just in customer service or whatever it might be, but across the board, how do you really start to focus on the stuff that matters? And I think this topic is so central to that idea of focus. It's a lot of organizations, they try to focus on certain things, but I think today, it's you and I can kind of get into why it's really important to focus on this thing versus maybe some of the others that are out there.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, quite honestly, this is it's one of the core things that allows you to compete. And I really think when you're trying to be the best, you're really competing against yourself. And so if you're not even thinking about another company, which, quite honestly, that's a reality, right? It's a reality of doing business. You're competing against other companies generally. If you're not competing against other companies, you either have a monopoly or you're in an industry that people don't care about too much. Nobody else wants to enter into it. But it has a strong connection to your purpose. It's really a big part of being able to actually serve your fellow man. We talked a lot in the purpose episode about having something that gets you and your team up in the morning to go to work that is bigger than yourselves, that's bigger than money, that honestly has the purpose of serving your fellow man. Well, part of serving your fellow man is understanding what your fellow man wants, understanding what they're trying to do, and it's really as simple as that. And I say that it's simple, but it's actually very difficult. David, you ran your own product company for a while. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to try to keep your company focused on really understand the customer?
Yeah, it is difficult. You're right in saying that the simplicity of, if you really just boil it down to, hey, like, who are you selling to? What do they want? And can you provide that? That's easy, right? The hard part comes in actually executing on that. And yeah, I think all companies struggle with the planning aspect of, if we do this, and this, then we feel like we can be competitive in the market, and here's why, and here's where we think we can fit in. And you get terms like product market fit thrown around, and people start to talk about, well, okay, how can we differentiate it? And these they're all good questions to ask, because to your point, you're always competing against somebody, but those things, it's one thing to ask those questions and to use those as tools to really narrow in on what it is that you want to do and why that's useful. It's another thing to start to build the way that you track progress, the way that you organize your organization around those things. Because, and I've gone through this personally, right? Where you get so caught up in, okay, we think we can play here, and this is our niche, and this is why it's going to work. And you start orienting everything around that. But the problem is those are shifting variables, right? And so you can orient around the market all you want. The truth is you don't actually control that side of things, right? And so what you can have a better understanding of is, who are we serving and what are their needs right now, and how do we orient around that piece. The other thing that's challenging, and this is for any company, is how to, when you think about insight into your customer base and the topic of feedback, it can be, it's a delicate balance between the feedback that you get from your customer base, or even your target customer base, how that gets incorporated into your product or your service, and where you choose to sort of forge ahead in an area that maybe isn't as well known to your customer base, and how you actually need to educate the market at times, right? So those are, and there are lots of these examples, right? But those are all examples of why it's actually more difficult than it sounds on the surface, right? Because it's not just as simple as, hey, whatever the customer asks for, you give it to them. Like, that's a terrible idea, right?
Right.
On the flip side, it's also not as simple as do whatever you wrote on a piece of paper on day one and never change and hope that works, right? So it's all that messy area in the middle that you operate within as a leader, whether it's a product or a service or anything else that you've got going. That's where it can get a little bit tricky.
Totally. And what did was it Henry Ford that said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses.
Yep.
and I always say, if we could ask people what they wanted and they could honestly tell us that, then all of this would be easy. But they can't. It's our job to figure out what they really want, right? And that's why we talk about understanding their intent, understanding the job to be done, because that tells you what they're trying to accomplish. And you can figure out something, right? Maybe something they never seen before. but you can educate the market. You can show them, hey, here's the thing you were trying to do. And that perks up the ears like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. What you got to say. And that's where you're trying to get. There's a study that was done by Acquia that talked about this, to try to see, where companies thought they were versus where the customer thought that the company's product and service was. And so, they found that only 10% of customers actually strongly agreed that the products they were using from any given company they were surveyed on was actually a good experience. That basically, in Acquia's words, that puts 90% of companies on the fence or worse, right? Like that means that 90% of companies, they're ready to switch at any moment. They're ready to switch away from you. And if you're thinking, you take a seat, think to all the things that you've bought, all the things you're using right now, and how many of them you're thinking, man, if I could just do this, I'd totally switch. Or if these people would just come here, if they would just bring a Trader Joe's to Atlanta, I would stop going to X grocery store or whatever. People say that stuff all the time. That switch is always ready to happen. If you think about it, brand loyalty is it's a fine line there. People can latch on, but your product and your service has to be able to nail it. We'll talk about that one in the next part in earnest. But when Acquia surveyed the companies, 82% of the companies thought that they had a good customer experience.
Yeah.
That's a big gap.
Yeah. It's again, you think about, it's not, I'll oversimplify by bringing up the topic of metrics, right? But that's a big part of that divide, right? Because when you ask, and this is true of a sales team or a customer service team as well, so we don't want to just pick on the marketers, but if you ask the marketing team how they're doing, and they come back in the affirmative on, yeah, things are going well. Generally speaking, what they're actually referring to are they're referring to the metrics that they're tracking on the campaigns that they're running, on the interactions that they expect to be getting, and how those conversions are actually going through in real life. That's really what they're responding to, right? Is did we hit? From a volume perspective, did we do what we said we would do? From a conversion perspective, did we do what we said we'd do? Did we generate the right number of MQLs, et cetera, et cetera? Like that's the answer that they're giving is based off of those metrics. The answer that their customers are giving are not based off of those metrics in any way, shape, or form, to your point, right? They're based off of, yeah, but my expectation for that brand in that moment was this. And instead, I feel like I got this, right? Now, you might be 180 degrees off and you got a real problem. You might be 5 degrees off. But even 5 degrees is enough for someone to think, yeah, but I'd still appreciate somebody doing better than what I'm getting right now. So, when you look at those types of differences, it's, on one hand, it's not surprising, but it's alarming. That's a big difference. You got 10% of customers saying, big thumbs up, and yet 82% of the people that are serving those customers are thinking they're doing a good job. It's definitely something that I think every organization needs to take a quick look in the mirror and say, okay, like, is there another way to talk about the definition of success in these areas? With these touch points on these journeys, are we missing something in how we are defining success versus how our customers are defining successful engagements with us?
Man, that's really one of the keys, honestly. And we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but having the right signals, having the right set of signals that you're tracking, those metrics, that customer feedback, having the right set of things is huge to being able to pinpoint how you're really doing. I think that there's a lot of importance on not leaning too heavy to one side, quantitative or qualitative. And being able to provide value is it hinges on understanding this. It hinges on one, understanding what the job is, right? Understanding the customer's intent, and being able to measure how you're doing. It's a big deal. You can kind of go two ways with this, right? There are companies that we know that have become great, that were started off of somebody entering into the market with something they wish existed. They created the company because they felt like nothing out there did the job, and they decided, well, I'm gonna form a team. I'm gonna build this thing, and they have an intrinsic understanding of the job, right? They have an intrinsic understanding of what needs to happen. That doesn't mean that it's an absolute understanding or a totally comprehensive understanding of how that might vary from person to person. So that doesn't rule that type out from needing to again be going out to the market, talking to people, getting the right metrics to understand. But that is one way that people kind of shortcut to knowing the job without being very sophisticated in their ability to get to draw that out of people. So you got one side there. The other side is identifying an opportunity, right? You got a lot of serial entrepreneurs that are really great at identifying, oh, wow, okay, these people want this thing. Nobody's providing that for them. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to do that, right? It might not be something that you yourself wanted, right? But the woman who has that entrepreneurial spirit, who says, I see an opportunity, I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to do this thing. Many great companies started off of that too, right? But having the ability to understand in the customer's words, from the customer's perspective, what they're trying to do is absolutely critical when you're at that point.
Yeah, I think in listening to you describe those, you use the word understand a couple of times, and I think that's really the key, right? It doesn't, whether you start with something that you have personally felt the pain and feel like you can make a difference in that area, in solving that pain, or you're just identifying something out in the market in others. There is a the kind of the common thread there, right, is that you actually understand what the problem is. You understand the pain that exists. You understand the progress that needs to be made in that area, and you can apply that to the individual customers that are being impacted, right? And then the second. For me, I always think about it in terms of, okay, number one, like, do you get it, right? Do you understand it? And then the second layer is to then put some expertise on top of that, right? So whether you are attempting to drive that solution in a direction that maybe people weren't expecting, and it's new and it's innovative. Again, like innovative in the sense of, are you actually solving a problem for somebody that couldn't be solved before, right? Not just kind of looking at, all right, well, somebody, did this, and when they did it, it was blue, so I'm going to do it in green. That's not necessarily doing anything. It's different, right? But it's not useful in any particular way. So I think that ability to understand, and then the ability to translate to, okay, we're going to apply our expertise, and this is why this thing matters. That's common across either one of those approaches, right? But you need to, it doesn't matter how you get there. What does matter is if you want to be effective, if you want to build something that actually matters, you have to have the right level of customer insight to ensure that as you get going, right, as you start to roll this thing out, as you start to interact with the market, that you have the right lens to say, yeah, this is working, or no, we need to adjust here, or we're so far off that we need to pivot entirely, right? Those decisions have to come from your ability to understand your customers and have that level of insight.
Totally. And, I'm sure that we've both been on enough teams to know the real sort of struggle that's there when you're doing product development, when you're doing service development. The real struggle of being able to answer the question at the time you need to answer it. The product companies I've worked at, we're always trying to figure out how to get the customer to say, these people get me at any given moment, whether it's messaging, whether it's a new product launch. While we're sitting in there whiteboarding, and I've been surprised. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this, one of the reasons I do what I do for a living, is because I saw that so much. I saw so much of us just not knowing, and us not. I realize that some of it is not taking the time to do the research, right? Not taking the time to do the research, and other times it's just we didn't have the right measures. We didn't have the right stuff in place. What's some of your advice for people on getting to the spot where you have those inputs?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll throw another variable in the soup here, and that's speed, right? Speed matters a lot in what we're talking about right now. People, you hear a lot about MVP, you hear a lot about, speed to launch and these sorts of things. And I think sometimes these phrases can get used so often that they lose meaning, right? So it's like product market fit, and then you have all these KPIs that you're tracking, and then you have like speed to market, and people just say those things so many times that I guess that's supposed to mean something. But here's the problem. Like you can't just like whisper those into the air and have them like actually turn into something useful. Right. And I think with the topic of speed in particular, so we talk about understanding your customer, we talk about the ability to translate, and then, obviously you need solid product and services teams that can go out and actually execute on that. Right. I mean, that's a big part of it. But part of this is how quickly can you test the ideas and the insights that you have against real data, against real customers, et cetera. And then how quickly can you adjust as that data is coming back, And I think that maybe that's a funny place to start when it comes to the question of, okay, well, what's some good advice on how best to think through this? But I think considering speed to be like a second or third order is actually a problem in this case. I think a lot of times organizations, they put that as almost like a nice to have, like, hey, we're going to come up with a plan, we're going to build the right team and all this other stuff. But if we can go fast, that would be great. Eventually we'll get there. And there's a part of this that says, yeah, but if you're not actively testing these theories that you have, if you're not actively testing your understanding of the customers that you're serving, the ground's going to move underneath you before you ever have the chance to do that. And by the time you actually hit that ground, it's different than the way it was before. And I'll pick on CNN here for a second, but we're sitting here with CNN just shuttering CNN Plus after a month, right? Or a month and a half or whatever it is. And listen, this happens all the time. Like, this isn't one of these, CNN's the first company that's ever had this issue, but $250-300 million spent over years of development on a streaming service that was meant to compete in a specific market that frankly has been around for a minute at this point. Listen, anytime you have something that has taken that hard of a fall that quickly, there's always more than one reason. But man, you can't help but think. I just don't think the world looked, when they launched, I think the world looked a lot different than when they planned. And for all of the, that's an organization that has all the resources in the world to do the planning, to do the research, to do a lot of the things that we're talking about. And they've been around for a minute. They, at least to some degree, like any company that's been doing what they do for a while, they understand their customers in the sense that those customers have been their customers for decades in a lot of cases. However, something didn't work, right? And so you start to look at those types of examples, and the questions that I always ask, and I've done this with organizations for years, is you have to go back and look at, all right, but what change were you actually trying to enact? And why did you think that this thing that you were launching was going to be the thing that really pulled that change through, right? That allowed that customer base that you were attempting to hit, whether it was your existing base and they wanted something different, or you were trying to reach out to a new market and this was the tool to bring them in, whatever that set of thesis was, like what went wrong? And I think a lot of times taking too long to plan, too long to develop, and not actually getting things out and being able to test like, hey, is this true? Is this still in need? Is this still an area where our customer base is looking to make some progress? If you can't ask that in short order, then you're at risk for doing a lot of other things right and still ending up on the wrong side of that equation.
Yeah, which is tough. I mean, it's really hard. Long development cycles, working on something that is, honestly years from being able to be released requires, constant adjustment. And I know what that's like being on those teams, how unsettling that can feel. You feel like, well, 2 weeks ago you told me to do this, and,
yep.
and without the team understanding the full context, it just feels like they're constantly having, the rug moved up under them. But it is important to be able to make those adjustments. And yeah, I mean, I definitely, when you talk about, spending to the order of 300 mil on trying to launch something that, flops that quickly. I mean, that stings, man. I don't wish that. I don't wish that on anybody. And I think that it is really a factor of a lot of things. Part of it is, and this is something we'll get into in another episode, is just how you operate. Do you actually have, the culture and the processes, the infrastructure in place to be able to move that fast? That's, we've both kind of been in the business of helping companies get there for a long time. But it's one of the things that you can have the insight, actually. But to your point, it can be an insight from a point in time that doesn't apply to the launch. I'm used to. I worked at a company where our development cycles were 18 months. World can look a lot different in 18 months from when you started developing.
It can. I think the other thing that's a little bit maybe counterintuitive to some folks, particularly if these concepts are feeling, a bit foreign to somebody listening, is the funny thing, like a lot of times your customer base, so in other words, the folks that you're actually trying to solve problems for, they can actually be considerably less fickle than the market is at times, right? And so I think the natural inclination is to say, well, we don't want to like index too hard on the customer piece because that's always moving. Whereas if we keep focused on this product market fit, if we keep focused on the market side of this, that's static and that's something that we can rely on. Funny enough, particularly if you're an industry that is evolving quickly, where innovation is happening, very quickly. If you're making that bet, you're kind of backwards on that front, because if you look at the actual problems that some of these, higher innovation markets and industries are solving at the moment, the customer's viewpoint actually hasn't changed for years. And in some cases, it hasn't changed for decades. The toys are different, right? The technology is different for sure. And that's where the innovation comes in, right? It's in the expertise side of things. But if you were to just focus on the customer need, I think what a lot of organizations would find is that's actually, that becomes a great North Star and one that doesn't have to change all that much. And when you think about your employees, when you think about the folks that are really helping to design and build this stuff, they'll find more stability in an overall focus on the customer than they would on an overall focus on, well, this is how we're going to hit the market, whatever that means. Because, in a lot of cases, that's changing every 3 months, right? Every quarter that's moving by enough that it's impactful. And so I think that, again, it's a little bit counterintuitive because for most people, it's, I think they think of the customer as this individual that's constantly changing their mind. And they think of the market as this giant force that's very slow to move. And what we're finding right now, particularly in tech, particularly in areas where digital has enabled, frankly, just more speed, is that it's the markets that are sometimes outpacing the customers, ability to change their expectations. And not only is it good practice for running your company, but it's actually the smart way to add some stability, is to think about, what is the customer actually trying to do here? What do they need to see happen? And how do we keep that focus as our North Star versus this other sort of amorphous thing that's got to fit into, one piece of a pie that's, that's still spinning pretty quickly at the moment.
That's right. And that's one of the reasons that I'm such a big proponent of using the theory of jobs to be done to understand what the customer is trying to do, because it is such a better way to go about triangulating where, as Wayne Gretzky puts it, where the puck is going to be. It's such a better way to triangulate that than some of the other ways that we might go about things, because it's just simple. It's understanding what their intent is and not tying that to a particular solution. What are they trying to achieve? And if you can find a way to achieve that in a more optimal way, then you can win. And it doesn't necessarily, like you said, the toys, the toys can change, right? But the intent doesn't change as much. The intent doesn't change nearly as quickly as the toys change. And we can get off and focusing on how the market is shifting to new toys, when those new toys might not necessarily be the optimal way either. It's the flavor of the moment, but you could still nail it when you actually understand that intent. And I don't want to go too far into jobs to be done. We've done a couple episodes on that. Highly recommend going back to those. So I won't bore you all with running through the theory again. But I will say that you want to understand, the functional, the social, the emotional parts of what causes somebody to buy. When you understand those things, and it does get very psychological. When you understand those things, I saw a business leader talking on LinkedIn yesterday, as a matter of fact, about what we call product market fit, right? And when we tossed the term out there, and he was, excuse me, he was actually kind of rough with it. He was like, all of us MBAs throw around the term product market fit like that's a thing, right? Like no customer thinks in terms of product market fit. You don't start with a product and try to find a market to fit it. It's a term that we toss around to soften the blow of, we missed the mark. We didn't understand what the customer wanted. When a startup fails, we say, oh, it wasn't the right product market fit. It's like, no, you didn't understand the customer. And I thought it was poignant. It was a little sharp edge, but I couldn't disagree with the guy. I'd love to know your opinion on that.
No, I think there's a lot of truth to that, right? And again, even the term market, I've been picking on that a little bit too in this conversation. Part of the reason that it always makes me cringe a bit is market's also a really easy way to, you almost create this sort of binary nature of, there's this thing that exists and you feel like there's a place for you inside of it, but it really, like, customer is still the more accurate term for the fact that we're ultimately serving a specific customer base, and in the context of markets, that may be a sub-market, right? It may be something that's actually more specific. You and I like to use kind of the EV movement a lot of times in just talking through some of this stuff, right? And that's a good example of where it's not like there's one right answer to how to build and sell electric vehicles right now, right? Tesla had an approach, has an approach, right? And that is working for them in a specific way. Ford's over there basically just swapping out engines and saying, hey, here's a new F-150 and it's electric. And guess what? This is not a hugely bold prediction. That's going to work for them too, particularly with that truck, right?
I want the truck. I want it.
Right. and that was that, and they beat, just about everybody else to market with that truck because they didn't worry about rebuilding the whole thing. And the point is, you can get caught up in what does the market want? Well, it depends on what you're selling and it depends on which problem you're trying to solve, right? And so I agree with that. And I think, in this case, Tesla really attached to a lot of things that were emotional, that were kind of like an innovation play where people wanted to be a part of that. And they became the representation of that. And obviously that's worked pretty well for them. I'm not saying that Ford will or will not or any of the other, but clearly right now, what Ford's saying is, yeah, but we've actually got a pretty good vehicle over here. And if there's a more mechanical need, which is people just want electric vehicles, but they kind of like that Ford logo and they kind of like driving trucks that look like this, we can make that happen, right? And they've leaned heavily into that side of things. But again, that's them understanding that there is an entire customer base that was basically raising their hand and saying, hey, like I wouldn't mind driving electric, but I don't need to drive one that looks like that, right? Or one that maybe still has issues with a couple of things because they're newer still. I'd still prefer to I'd like to drive a Ford. Can I do that, right? And they found that particular area of progress that they could fill. So couldn't agree more on. I think sometimes we generalize things for the purpose of making ourselves either feel good after the fact or back to the metrics conversation, right? We also use terms like that at times to help the numbers fit the narrative, right? We want to feel like if we can hit this and we can do this and the funnel looks like that, et cetera, then that must be the way to move forward. And we can build these terms that sort of support that without maybe fully considering, but what is that problem that we're solving? And as we get rolling, are we checking ourselves on, are we getting our customer base closer to solving that?
Right. Yeah. And I think that one of the ways to protect yourself from getting too focused on the market, right? Like, is to make sure that you're balancing between the qualitative and the quantitative aspect of customer insight, right? So you want to have the quantitative to know where to spend time getting qualitative data, right? You want to be able to go, you want to have that quantitative measure to say, okay, we're seeing this story here, we're seeing this trend here. Let's understand why. Let's not try to say that something is true just because we see a correlation, right? We want to understand causation. And that is where you rely heavily on your qualitative tools, going and interviewing, going and surveys can be a good form of qualitative data. In my opinion, it's a little harder to get somebody to give you the amount of information that you need to be able to triangulate truth just off of a survey. But I'm not knocking surveys. I definitely recommend interviews more. But quantitative data is great for being able to understand large amounts of happenings and trends. And having direct measures of things, but I don't think it is. I'd actually go so far as to say it objectively is not good at explaining causation. Would love to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agreed. Right, I think that you can always look at from a performance standpoint, right? Some of these metrics, macro level, are we achieving? There's plenty of value in looking at a lot of the standard KPIs on the quantitative side, and qualitatively, right? Just getting that more emotional feel of why did our customer base do a thing, right? Whether it was opting in, opting out, whether it was coming on board or whether we were offboarding them, or looking at maybe the competitive space and why they're doing that with other providers in the same industry, right? I think there's a lot to be I mean, listen, not all the rules of business go out the window here, right? Those are still solid ways of looking at performance and identifying symptoms at times. But on the causation side, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, one of the things that I try to work with people on is to think about some of these standard metrics, the standard things that are worth evaluating, and to actually place those on a timeline, place those within your journey, and look at them in that way, right? So it's not enough to kind of just say, okay, like, how did we do last month, and you do a little bit of research, or you look at you might look at some market statistics, for one that you might want to head into, and you kind of take them in, but you actually have to break that down to the buyer cycle, the customer journey that exists all the way through, and say, well, at which points are most important, right? Because there are going to be times where, it could be in just them getting awareness of your brand. It could be when they start interacting with your brand in a deeper way. It could be them as a customer and how they feel or don't feel versus what they expected. But at different key points along that journey, if you can start to apply some, qualitative or quantitative along the journey, that's when it becomes actionable, right? That's when you can have real conversations with your customers, real conversations with your employees around, hey guys, like, ultimately, yes, this is the output we're seeing. We love it. We hate it. Somewhere in between, fine. But what we're actually seeing is at these 3 key points, this is where we can improve. And here's where we think we can, right? So it's to truly make it actionable. And again, to bring it back to not we're going to, move these levers and knobs around just because we can, or because we're, A/B testing for the sake of it. But we have a strong understanding of where the pain exists in this process, and we can apply this there. Like that's a big part of it.
Absolutely, man. I will say that one of the things that drives me a little bit crazy that got really popular in the software development world was, A/B testing things, finding that making one small change would drive sales up or drive conversions up, like, a blue button instead of a green button, right? For some reason, you changed it to a blue button and the sales went up. And I found so many times where it's like, well, we changed, we made it a blue button because the blue button, the sales went up when we changed it to a blue button, and it happened a lot. Like, we knew it was a thing. I'm like, why? They don't know why.
Yeah.
They don't know why.
Yeah.
They just, they did it just cause. I mean, the numbers went up. I'm not going to knock you for doing it, right? But I am going to knock you if you don't go find out why.
Yeah.
Because finding out why can be way more powerful than blue button. Because then the solution becomes blue button. Then the legend in the organization becomes blue buttons work better than green buttons. That's what happens.
Yep.
But we don't know why blue buttons work better than green buttons.
No doubt. No doubt.
And so, highly recommend when something like that happens, talk to the customer, go find out, talk to a couple of them and ask, try to get to why that happened. And again, that's a part of, your operational alignment to being able to have that ongoing, ever refreshing customer insight, right? Not the point in time. We did a research project, time to go. This is what the customer wants, and we don't check it again for 12 months. Like that, I agree that in a sense you have research projects. There's a level of depth that you get to that can't be done every week. You can't be doing that every sprint. You can't be doing that, every couple of weeks. Totally get that. However, when you see something that changes, when there's a signal that comes in that piques your ears, that changed performance. You need to understand causation there to be able to leverage what you just saw, and to be able to educate your team and everybody that joins your team after to have that knowledge to be able to serve the customer better.
Yeah, I think, when you look at take customer lifetime value or NPS, right? So Net Promoter Score. If you look at those two metric types, and you think about how they're used right now, I think those are good examples of you can there's value in both of those metrics, right? There's value in thinking about CLV and what that means. Obviously, I mean, for most companies, that is a lifeblood type of KPI, right? Net Promoter Score, same thing, right? There's a lot to be said for, hey, if we can grab sentiment in this moment, then we can at least kind of think about what we've done so far and have a grade or a score that we can, give ourselves, right? We can see how attached people are. But to your point, the why there, sometimes I think those metrics get looked at as though they just appear, right? But what actually happens is there is an organization and there is a customer and there are a series of events that happen over the course of time. And those events, those interactions, those moments where the customer continues to kind of update their opinion of what's happening and compare that against their expectations for what they thought would happen and their decision to be disappointed or to be delighted or to be satisfied or whatever that might be. Those are actual points along the way. And that isn't to say that there's always one big bang moment. Sometimes it's just an accumulation of things that sort of lean somebody in a specific direction, right? But you never want to forget that it is all of these touch points. It's the way that you serve your customer that ultimately drives something like, hey, did they stick around over that 5-year period, right? And do we expect CLV to look like this, right? When they said that they would recommend us, well, what were they really responding to, and how accurate is that? So I think it's a great. It's just one of those things where it's not an either or, but you have to. It's a both and. Like you have to really understand. Well, how do they get to that point? Again, like what's the why there, right? And if you get that, it just to point it back to, none of this stuff matters as an organization if you can't act on it, right? Having all these metrics and saying, okay, well, we think we understand this and we think we can model out CLV, which is going to give us, somewhat of a model if we want to enter in this new mic. Unless you can do something about it, like it doesn't mean anything other than the spreadsheet that it's trapped within.
That's that, man. That is so great. I think that a lot of these measures that that we talk about, CSAT, NPS, customer lifetime value, and I put customer lifetime value up there pretty high on the list, just because you want to take something that pretty dang good measure in and of itself. People keep buying. People buy more.
Fantastic. Yep.
I mean, it's hard to if you can only have one metric, that's the one I want, right?
Agreed.
Yeah. So I put that high on the list. I think that you're absolutely right. Being able to act on that knowledge. It's one thing to have the knowledge. It's another thing to be able to act on it. It's kind of funny. I'm actually writing a piece, and that's kind of the two things I make that sort of dichotomy of knowing and acting. And I think that being able to act on that comes from being able to say, all right, we're taking this mix. We're taking this mix of qualitative and quantitative data. We know based on the qualitative data that we have that these metrics tend to mean this, right? You can take a step back and say, we've seen over time that, when we've seen this trend and we went and we actually asked why, that this is what that meant. We can't rely on it always meaning that, but we're going to go with what we know right now. I'm a big fan of having that mix, right? So if you're asking us, 3 of our top: customer lifetime value, CSAT, NPS. I'm a fan also of doing what Mercedes-Benz's CX group did and made their own index. They made their own index where they mixed a bunch of different metrics together and they weighted them differently to give them an actual metric that they could use on how they did in serving the customer. And they have journey point in time metrics that go into that index that I think is really powerful. It's not easy to come up with. It's not easy to get right, but it's worth it, I think. And so I think that, we talked about a lot of things here, but I'd love for us to get into what this enables your company to do. David, I'd love to hear you talk about what you think. Again, from a guy who has worn the CEO hat a couple times here, what do you think this enables a company to do?
I mean, listen, that's always the question, right? Because we can talk about understanding, and we can talk about action, and we can talk about KPI. We can talk about a lot of this stuff, but if it doesn't actually boil down to what is this enabling for your organization and for your customers, then it doesn't mean a whole lot, And I kicked off this conversation talking about speed as something that needs to be baked into the initiative itself, right? So that needs to be woven into the culture of, as we're thinking about launching something or changing something, et cetera, that it can't be this infinite timeline, right? Because by the time we get there, like we talked about, the ground's going to shift a little bit underneath us. It works both ways, though, right? The better that you understand your customer, the more capable you are of going fast. So it's not just, you got to think fast and then that'll help you to kind of keep a customer. Yeah, that works. But it's also the other side of that, which is if you want to be able to continuously deliver high quality, that comes from a place of understanding of the customer, right? So yes, the action, the kind of that palpable side of this is that it just seems like these guys are always putting out good stuff. Well, yeah, well, guess what? It's because they actually understand who they're serving and they're able to make those small tweaks along the way. And, it's one thing to make a lot of changes. It's another thing to make changes that always feel like they're just right. It's like, wow, wasn't, and maybe, it's one of those things too, where it's like, it's not one product release or it's not one shift in the way that an organization talks about itself from a branding standpoint, or whatever. It's almost like you look back over the last 6 months and you think, ooh, things are different now than they were, and I like it. That's not magic, right? There is a level of deep understanding of your customer that has to be present for you to be able to do that and really interact in that real time fashion. Another thing that I've seen so many times in organizations that I've been a part of, that I've helped lead, organizations that I've worked with, is this, you want this feeling of agility. So talk a lot about left to right customer journey, right? From the moment that somebody finds out about you and starts to gain that awareness all the way through their journey of becoming a customer, what that means, where their loyalty actually sits from a brand perspective. And if you want to shape your organization, and that's people, that's process, that's technology, it's all of it, right? If you want to shape your organization in such a way that, much like speed to market on the product side, you're continuously evolving in small but important ways. That's you don't get to do that. Yeah, I will go as far as to say, you actually don't earn the right to do that until you understand who your customer is. There's just no way around. I mean, you can change all you want, but if it's not based on that, then guess what? You're probably going to be just reversing those changes 6 months from now, if we're being honest. And so I think that's a big part of it. It's not change for the sake of change, but it's that constant evolution. It's that, how do we get 1% better? It's so you kind of take that growth mindset approach, but 1% better in the context of serving our customers, not just 1% better on something that's arbitrary or looks great in the report that you're going to run at the end of quarter. And so I think, you start to see speed to market pick up, you start to feel a little more agile, and truthfully, the net of all of that is brand equity. And that's what every organization is going after, right? Is that level of its consistency, and it's creating positive customer experiences, right? It is all around experience, but it's doing that consistently. It's like, does somebody know what they're going to get every time they interact with your brand? And you mentioned earlier that there can be fickleness in affinity to brands, and we talked about that report around 10% of customers actually think that the brand is serving them versus the 85% or whatever that think they're doing a good job, right? The consistency at which you deliver those positive experiences is what, even though it's in the minority, that's what drives the 10%, right? That's what drives customers to say, you know what, like these folks, they get it right. And I'm willing to stay a part of that family in order to be on the receiving end of that. So lots of good stuff that can come from understanding your customer. And again, I'll say it one more time, before we wrap this discussion, this is not a nice to have. This is a rite of passage situation. If you do not understand and have deep insight into who your customers are and the progress they're trying to make, it's nearly impossible to get some of this other stuff right, at least to get it right consistently. You might, one out of every 3-4 times you might get a base hit, but it's hard to get this stuff right consistently if you don't understand those pieces.
Absolutely, man. I think that you absolutely nailed it, man. It's just it's such an honor and a pleasure to be able to do this with you, man, because I love the insight that you bring, especially from your experience. I think that those things that we talk about here, obviously we're not talking about them because they're nice to have. This isn't just like hey, like if you want to be pretty good, like you should do this stuff. It is, you need to do this if you want to be able to play the game. If you want to stay in the game, you got to do this. And if you want to be the best, which is, I hope that you listen into this show because you want to be the best. And if you want to be the best, this is the stuff that you've got to be able to do. I've heard it said, the difference between 90% perfect and 100% perfect is double the work. I'm not saying try to do double the work all the time, but you got to have that desire to get it perfect. Desire to be the one who puts in that extra time to get that one notch, right? That like you talked about, David, have somebody say, "Man, this is so much better. This is right. This is just right." So, folks, we really appreciate you listening. We will catch you next week. We're going to be bringing on a guest that we're both pretty fond of, and he's going to help us to understand how to hire. So until next time, keep out serving your competition on your relentless pursuit to become an experienced leader. Catch you in the next one.